various aspects of flight in birds. Now, flight is intriguing because not all animals do it, but in reality it has evolved at least 3 different times among the vertebrates. Right, so if you have your ancient archosaurs and your synapsids, okay, so remember those vertebrate groups, the synapsids had a synapsid skull, the archosaurs had what kind of a skull in terms of temporal openings? Yeah, it was a diapsid skull. You know, so they led to, for example, our modern day crocodilians are derived from the archosaurs. Our modern day birds are evolved from the archosaurs, so that's one place in which flight evolved. But they also gave rise to a group called the pterosaurs. And the pterosaurs are the second group for flight, not necessarily in that order, evolutionarily speaking. And the synapsid gave rise to which group that could fly? The best, of course. All right. So we do have 3 origins of flight, potentially, among the vertebrates, 1 from the synapsids and 2 independent lines from the archosaurs. Just to say a word about the pterosaurs, they were structured very differently than the birds were, so that if you look at an archosaur, sorry, the pterosaur, you can see something like this. That's fingers. And this one out here is the 4th finger. So the structure of their wing is very different from the structure of a bird's wing in the sense that it's more bat-like. You had a very elongated 4th finger extending out greatly, and from the tip of that 4th finger back to the body, you had a wing membrane. Right? And no evidence of feathers in these guys. In actuality, I think there's a picture on, yes. So that might look a little bit better than my drawing. Not much, but. So that's just the second page of that group of handouts. All right, so 2 examples of pterosaurs, and you can see that elongate 4th finger going out there, and then the wing membrane stretching back to it. Well, the earliest known bird, that's a problem. Historically, it has always been Archaeopteryx. There have been some recent fossil finds within the last 3-4 years. Some people question whether Archaeopteryx was truly the first bird, or are these newer fossils that are older, are they potentially the first bird? In particular, there's one called Orornyx. I have a hard time saying it. That would be the genus. If anybody's still looking for a term paper topic, I think that the evolution of flight in birds and the evolution of birds in general from the reptiles would be a suitable topic, just because what I was finding online when I was typing in oldest bird or first bird. Don't type in oldest bird, you get, you know, a 45-year-old parrot had laid an egg kind of thing. But first bird, you can come up with some stuff. All right, so historically it's been Archaeopteryx for a very long period of time. So now there's speculation there might be another. Let's just look at Archaeopteryx. It was around in the late Jurassic. And one of the cool things about Archaeopteryx, and similarly this other bird, is that there's a lot of similarities between the reptiles and the birds. When you look at that specific animal, you see a lot of contradictions. Come on. All right, so that's the first page of the handouts that you get. On the left there, you have the outline of the skeleton of Archaeopteryx. And next to it, you have something labeled columba. What would columba be? Okay, true. And that's a particular genus, and your pigeon is Columba livia. Right. So there's a modern pigeon on the right, and then Archaeopteryx there on the left. And so when you look at Archaeopteryx, I mean, it has a lot, really, it looks like a bird to a large degree. But then when you start looking closer, there are many, many reptilian characteristics. First off, there's some teeth in the mouth. And modern birds don't have teeth. You can't really tell, but it is a modified diapsid skull. It has a single occipital condyle, just like reptiles do. It has these structures in the belly. What would those be? Yeah, the gastralia. All right, so gastralia, those dermal bones, bones of dermal origin that were in the abdominal area. No modern bird has that, but Archaeopteryx had that. Note the long bony tail in Archaeopteryx. That's something that no modern bird has. And there's just lots of other characteristics that really show that this animal did become derived from the reptiles. Okay, one extreme bird-like characteristic of Archaeopteryx that was detected with the fossil was the presence of feathers. We're going to spend most of today then on feathers. All right, feathers have always been considered very important to taxonomists. Evolutionary taxonomists use feathers as one of the main reasons to put birds in a separate class, the class Aves. Even your cladists are going to say that feathers are very important, okay, in the evolution of these animals. Okay, function of feathers. Well, in modern birds, feathers are necessary for flight. Right? It's the feathers that give you the surface of the wing, and the surface of the wing is what provides lift and propulsion. So the force that goes against gravity and the force that propels the animal forward. In modern birds, feathers also are used as insulation. So birds have a high body temperature, a high constant body temperature. They insulate their body then with feathers. Insulation was probably the first function of feathers, before feathers were adapted for flight. Secondary functions of feathers, things like concealment, communication. Right? The idea you can make your feathers different colors, you can hide from predators potentially, or you can make yourself bright in color and make yourself attractive to a female. All right, so communication and or concealment could be secondary functions of feathers. Primary functions in modern birds, though, are flight and insulation. Okay. What are they made of? Well, they're made of a familiar protein, keratin. So this protein is what we find in the stratum corneum of the skin. We talked about that before. It's a protein that we find in feathers. It's a protein that we do find in mammalian hairs. However, mammalian hairs and feathers are slightly different kinds of keratin. That which the birds have is beta keratin, and mammals are going to have something called alpha keratin. So they differ as opposed to whether or not they're a spiral-shaped molecule or whether they're linked chains. That's not important. But the main idea here is feathers are homologous to reptilian scales, but they are not homologous to mammalian hairs. All right, so they're homologous to the scales. The scales of the reptiles include the stratum corneum, which is filled with keratin. We're getting a structure that starts off forming in a very similar manner. And when you do get the production of a feather, you'll get a structure like this. So-called feather follicle. So that would be my epidermis, and there would be my dermis. So you are getting an indentation down into the skin. So that's where the word follicle comes from. And it's the cells within this feather follicle that are actually going to produce the feather. So that ultimately the feather would be growing up and out of that follicle. So beta keratin, homologous to reptilian scales. They're going to form in this pit called a feather follicle. It's the epidermis of the skin in that follicle that actually makes the cells that become the feather. Right? So mitosis will occur in the epidermal cells of the feather follicle. Those cells will slowly die and fill with keratin, and they'll be pushed out by younger and younger cells, giving us ultimately that feather. This is just showing, as it says, late stage in the embryonic formation of the feather papilla. But you can see that indentation, and you can see that little finger-like papilla sticking up. But note that it is the epidermis that's around the outside.
So the mitosis is occurring in the epidermis?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Okay, and remember that, and that's very similar to what we've seen before. And it's the dermis, though, that has the good blood supply. Remember, there is no blood supply in the epidermis. So what we're having with this large amount of dermis at the base of that feather papilla, that's where we're getting our nutrients coming in, our oxygen coming in, anything we need to fuel the mitosis that results in these cells that eventually become the feather. Okay, structure of a feather. We'll use a typical flight feather, like one you can take from the wing, in order to illustrate the components of a feather. Well, you're going to have a main shaft in a feather that consists of two parts, a calamus and a rachis. Right, so that would be my main shaft. Let's say this is all the stuff that comes off. The calamus then is going to be the part at the bottom here with no projections coming off, whereas the rachis is this portion over here associated with the projections. In general, all of those projections are called the vein. So the part of the feather the part of the shaft of the feather associated with the vein is the rachis. The part at the base that does not have the vein is the calamus. Well, what makes up the vein? The vein is going to have many projections coming off of it, coming off of the main axis, the rachis. Many structures called barbs. Right? So we're talking about what is forming the vein. Vein is made up of barbs.